Hey everyone, welcome back to the Cast and Spirit podcast. My name is John, and today we have the final episode with Lindsey Philpott, an expert in knots. You can get all of his books at theknotguy.com. Today we're going to be talking about, is it still possible to invent new knots? Welcome back to the show, Lindsey.
Thank you, John. Very good to be here again. And the question is it possible to invent new knots? Absolutely, it's possible. Um, there are several books. Uh, I have, and hope you're sitting down, I have 2,000 books all about knots in my collection. And those are not ones that I've written. Those are ones that other people have written in various languages: Russian, Chinese, Japanese, Spanish, French, you name it. There are books about knots in just about every language in the world. Of course, many of them are written in languages that I don't read, but I can understand knots. And that's really what it comes down to is if you understand knots, then you can understand how to make new knots. So yes, new knots are possible. Is it possible to have a knot named after you? Well, if your ego is that in need of stroking, then yeah, by all means, go for it. But don't be surprised if somebody says, oh, wait a minute, that was invented back in 1854 by Captain Smith on the vessel Persephone. And you say, what? No, it couldn't have been. And then you have to prove it. And that can land you in all sorts of problems. For those that have tried to and succeeded patent a knot, you can do so. Good luck trying to recoup your money on the cost of generating the patent and on the cost of trying to go after whoever else may be tying the knot and saying, oh, yes, I've got this one from patent number, whatever it was. Even if they admit to it, you're not going to get money from it. Will you get some fame? Sure, you get a little bit of fame. Um, but it may be the fame that is something you don't want. And that's something to watch out for. Yes, it's entirely possible to invent new knots. At the moment, the number of knots of which I am aware is somewhere in excess of 10,000. That's including some decorative knots, not all decorative knots, of course, somewhere in excess of 10,000. There are books that include 2,000 or 3,000 knots. And there are many, many books that include several hundred knots. There are some books that include your favorite 12 knots. Does that mean that the one that you've invented or that you think is unique to you should not be in there? Of course it should be in there. Why not? Knots have been around for tens of thousands of years. We've got physical examples that are 10,000 plus years old, fibers that have been recently found that are 40,000 years old. It's difficult to know whether or not a particular knot has been seen before, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't try. If you think you've got a better way to do that, let the world be the path to your door and go ahead and invent it. Make it happen.
I know you don't need this for your ego, but is there a Philpott knot that you've contemplated that you want to make?
N- No, I have not. I've been so intrigued by looking through all of the knots that I know how to make and what to do with them that the very idea of having something new and different has never occurred to me because I have not found a lack of use of knots to be present. In other words, I want a knot to do such and such a job. Is there a knot that exists? Yes, you could do this one, you could do that one, you could do that one, you could do that one. Yeah, but how about if I put an extra twist in here? Does that make it better? Well, test it and see. If you test it and see and it turns out to be stronger or easier to tie or looks better, good, you've got a new knot. but I've never been tempted to do that because I've always found that there's plenty of variety of knots that exist in the world that I really don't need to have the ego stroke that a Philpott knot would do. Although I tell you a short story here, I sailed as a volunteer on the brig Pilgrim out of Dana Point in California for nearly 20 years. And as such, I was known for tying knots. And one of the things that we would do when we went out on an annual trip on the Pilgrim with the crew, whom I'd trained and told how to tie knots and how to do various other jobs and functions on the ship. One of the things that we would do would be to have a cheer up the captain night, a skit night, in other words, a time when we would try and do something fun for each other. Because let's face it, looking at the sea all the time can get a little bit tedious. Anyway, it was my turn to be roasted, as it were. And what they did was they tied, instead of the right knot, they just tied lots of knots. And they put it all together and they said, "This is the Philpott what knot." And we all had a good laugh about it. Turns out it didn't have any particular use at all. So I still have it on my shelf somewhere. And I'm delighted that people found such amusement in it because to me, knots are emblematic of something that we've missed for a long time, and that is the old crafts and the old skills that are present in all of our backgrounds, and yet we refuse to use them because we think, oh, there must be something that somebody's made that's going to do that job easier, simpler, quicker, faster, and a lot more costly.
If I had to ask you, like, not just specific to fishing, but if you had the 5 or 10 most useful knots in your life that you've seen over the last, multiple decades, can you rattle that off? Like, you're like, oh man, if I had to do this for the boat, I would use this one. I love this knot. It really just like memorize it. Or if I do this for a fishing line, I do this.
Yeah, I would. It's a great question. It's a good thing to think about, and something that I've thought about in the past when teaching how to tie knots. The half hitch is the basis of many knot starts. So that's a good one to know. Then the overhand knot is a good one to know how it's formed and how it works and doesn't work. Then the clove hitch. Then going on from the clove hitch, the constrictor knot. The constrictor knot is a combination of an overhand knot and a clove hitch. And if you ever are tempted to tie a constrictor knot, you will know that it forms a very, very tight knot. Beyond that, then, a round turn and 2 half hitches, I find is very helpful. A midshipman's hitch. The one that I like for tying in the middle of a piece of line is known as an alpine butterfly knot. I used to use that when I was doing rock climbing. It's very helpful to be able to tie a knot in the middle of a line and not have it ruined. And then, of course, the trucker's hitch and highwayman's hitch, both of which are very helpful and utilize having a bight as the deforming part and the one which allows you to take it apart very quickly instead of having to rely on pulling an entire piece of line through. So that's what I would say.
That's awesome. And I think you mentioned teaching, and offline you said this quote, and I just want to let everybody else hear it because I really liked it. I can explain it to you, but I can't understand it for you. And I love that. You got to go do the work, guys. You got to go put in the practice, and then you'll be great at knots. So Lindsey, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for this masterclass in knot making, knot structures, knot everything. Appreciate it.
You're very welcome. It's been a pleasure for me, and I certainly hope that everybody does their due diligence on practice, practice, practice.
You heard him. Go to thenotguy.com, guys, and then go say hi to Lindsey. Thanks, guys. Hey guys, one more thing before you go. You can subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and your favorite podcast app. And if you like the podcast, please consider rating it on Apple Podcasts and leaving a review. This helps other people find the show. Thanks.